We are now live on Facebook with the event Tackling Anti-Semitism and Hate in Football.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program. My name is Alina Brickman. I am the Director of EU Affairs at Panelist International. We are a Jewish advocacy and service organization working globally to safeguard Jewish life, as well as tackle anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. Today, we're delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel of government experts on anti-Semitism, as well as some of Europe's top elite football teams for a discussion on how to address anti-Semitism and hate in football. The ongoing pandemic provides an unfortunate and inevitable background for the conversation, and it's unfortunately also taken its toll on the sphere of football. Just this weekend, a lot of fans worldwide were going to be watching the final of the European Championship, which of course, unfortunately, was cancelled. But we wanted to take the opportunity of this specific moment to stay within the theme. And we do so by recognizing really the enormous potential and reach of sports to captivate the hearts and minds of millions of fans worldwide. And with this, the responsibility that comes to really work to induce positive change. And indeed, this ongoing moment that we all recognize of racial justice brought with it a renewed push to work to eradicate hate and anti-Semitism in football. And we're very much looking forward to hear from all of you what action steps you've been taking in this context, as well as other ongoing efforts. Today joining me is my colleague Ilan Selby, who is our EU Affairs Officer, and I will let him introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Alina, and welcome everyone also from my side. As Alina mentioned, we're privileged to be joined by an expert panel today, and I have the pleasure of introducing them. Lord John Mann joins us as the UK government's anti-Semitism advisor, and in his role, he has been very active in engaging with football clubs, both in the UK and across Europe. We're very pleased that Councillor Gianluca Gerli is part of this panel discussion, and he is representing the Office of the Coordinator in the fight against anti-Semitism in Italy. Next, we're joined by Daniel Lörcher, Head of Corporate Responsibility at Borussia Dortmund. We're also very pleased to have Simon Taylor with us, Head of the Chelsea FC Foundation, and also delighted that Martino Roghi will join the discussion today as the Manager of Corporate Social Responsibility for AC Milan. I'll now pass back over to Alina, who will kick off the discussion.
Thank you, Ilan. So before jumping into the football discussion, I think we'd all benefit from a bit of background as to how these two very clear points of reference, on one side the pandemic, and on the other side this very tangible movement around racial justice, have played out in the two national contexts of our anti-Semitism experts, and how the Jewish community has internalized them and been affected by them. So Lord Mann, maybe I will go to you first. Would you be able to speak a little bit about how the COVID pandemic has impacted the community, but also how the movement towards racial justice, protests that have been ongoing in the UK have impacted society as a whole, and how this has been perceived within the Jewish community and your work? If you could please unmute yourself first.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate. The advice I've given to the UK government on the pandemic and anti-Semitism is, at the moment, everything is quite calm. Of course, there are some problems. There are always some problems to deal with. But we're not seeing an increase in anti-Semitism. However, I've alerted the UK government to the expectation I have that if the world economy goes bad, with unemployment in the UK and elsewhere, this will be the moment of great danger for the rise in anti-Semitism, as people look for somebody to blame. And therefore, complacency would be incredibly dangerous. From the point of view of the work we are doing, one of the big regrets, it's a huge problem, this pandemic. You know, I have friends who have died, friends who are severely ill in hospital currently. So we have to have proportion in our views. However, one of the smaller irritations is that we had a whole series of Premier League football clubs about to announce their adoption of the IHRA declaration on anti-Semitism, following the lead of Chelsea FC, which was followed publicly by Bournemouth FC and West Ham United. So 3 Premier League clubs. There are another 6 or 7 to be precise now, who've indicated a desire to come on board. And we had a number of launches prepared, and we're waiting for gentler times for this to happen because people's priorities elsewhere. So in the midst of bad news and problems, I remain very optimistic. The Jewish community is very resilient, very well organized, better than before, both in the UK and I think elsewhere. And football has started to take the opportunity to play a modest but vitally important role as a key part of civic society with a huge reach to people. So I'm optimistic for the future, but there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm listening intently to hear what the experts I see in front of me have to say.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very happy to hear a rather optimistic message, all things considered. And indeed, the question of the IRA definition and the importance of actually defining what we're dealing with will be a part of the conversation, certainly moving forward. You mentioned the question of scapegoating, and I think that this has been indeed a very tangible problem as we see conspiracy theories emerging that definitely have an anti-Semitic component to them, and that's something I think we're all keeping an eye on. So then I would move to Mr. Gerli. Perhaps you could tell us how you've seen the situation develop in Italy on the same two questions.
Of course, thank you again for the invitation. First of all, I have to say that Professor Milena Santerini, which is the national coordinator for the fight against anti-Semitism, really wants to apologize for not being here today. But I can speak about the working experience of our office, which was created by the presidency of the Council of Ministers almost 6 months ago. As you point out, and also as Lord Mann points out, during these months, regarding the pandemic, we can see that such unpredictable and global events made fears for the future grow stronger among population. It grew the prejudice against some groups, which are often, as you said, considered as enemies against whom direct the anger. And sometimes, let me tell you that this rage is fostered by some political forces. We see also that the fears of a plot are on the rise, as more and more people believe that some kind of secret economical forces, as you mentioned, are conspiring to impose their rule. We made a research on Twitter during the pandemic, which shown that 17% of hate speech tweets blame Jews or Israel to be responsible for the virus. And if I'm not wrong, I think that there is a similar research made by the University of Oxford, which depicts kind of similar scenario. Now we are starting to witness the economic effects of this pandemic. And we expect, unfortunately, we expect social imbalances and social injustices to grow. And this is strictly related to a rising prejudice, especially regarding online racism and anti-Semitism. That's why we are thinking to focus our work also on the hate speech online. Regarding the second point, regarding the global movement against racism, we first of all have to notice that not all racist episodes are tackled as they should. This means that we have the rules to deal with this problem, but we need to comply with them. I think that after the death of George Floyd, we see that many supporters and top players send strong anti-racist messages during matches, no? And we have to bear in mind that all those forces who believe in the richness, I think, of a plural society should fight against racism and anti-Semitism together.
Thank you, Gianluca, for your comments, and particularly if I can say the comment you made about the need to stay vigilant for both forms of hate, both in the online and offline sphere. This is something that we are engaging with at B'nai B'rith, and thanks for your comments on that, certainly. So on this backdrop, having gotten a bit of a glimpse into the national context, broadly speaking, that we're engaging with today, let's move our focus onto football specifically. We'd love to hear from you how your football clubs have been impacted by the pandemic and how you have reacted or indeed internalized the ongoing racial justice movement, which has sought to shine a light on ingrained racial biases within our social institutions. And the sporting world is certainly no different in this respect. Simon, if I can come to you, Chelsea has been a long-standing proponent of anti-racist work, but how has the club been active on this issue in recent weeks specifically? And perhaps if I can ask, how do you seek to generate or rather promote this discussion among primarily Chelsea supporters and also other Chelsea stakeholders?
I think it's essentially an extension of the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years with our Say No to Anti-Semitism campaign. So, you know, what we've tried to do is foster education, awareness, and support organisations that are committed as Chelsea to fighting all forms of discrimination. You know, we've produced a number of guides for stewards because we think it's important that when fans go back to football clubs, that the stewards are prepared. We'll also be looking to write another stewarding guide on anti-Muslim hatred as well as our anti-Semitism guide. And then what we've been working with is our fans, when they use anti-Semitism or any forms of discrimination within the grounds of Stamford Bridge, and we can identify them. What we've tried to introduce is a restorative justice program. We've worked with a number of organisations to make sure that fans get the opportunity to be educated, not just to be banned. So a fan may get the opportunity to reduce their ban if they successfully undergo a program within the club to make them aware of the consequences of their actions. So I think what the pandemic has done is allowed us to focus very much on the work that we have been doing and to see where the work that we will be doing when fans go back and when schools go back in the UK en masse, you know, just how much we can sort of help to impact them positively.
Thanks a lot for that. And of course, it's wonderful that there was already a strong skeleton of work on which to kind of receive the current moment. And I take note of the guides on anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred. Indeed, I think it's always laudable when work on anti-racism is both holistic and specific, addresses multiple forms of discrimination, but also gives each one its due attention. And also very interesting, the discussion about fans, which we will again touch on later when speaking about responsibility and liability of teams in that regard, but great to already have it noted as a point of conversation. Let me move on to Daniel now to get a sense of how Borussia Dortmund has been doing in the current period. BBI knows firsthand your commitment. And we had the chance to work together on projects in the past. But I wonder how these past few weeks have played out. We've actually seen a lot of players wearing T-shirts during trainings with anti-racist messages. We've seen many of them take a knee, dedicate their goals to George Floyd, which I'm sure has been inspirational to a lot of your supporters. But I wonder particularly whether there have been more structured initiatives to address the current moment.
Yeah, thanks first of all for your invitation and the opportunity to speak here. Our year was really kind of crazy, like everybody's year. We started with we took part in the We Remember campaign from the World Jewish Congress in the end of January, and have had took part in the World Holocaust Forum in Israel in January. And during this visit to Israel, we decided also to adopt the IRA declaration or definition of anti-Semitism. And then for the same reason, like John told everybody, we weren't able to sign it right now, but we are waiting for better times during or after the pandemic. Yeah, our program was really stressed or kind of stopped to this pandemic, and we tried to offer some possibilities in digital lectures, for example, for the supporters who usually took part in our program. And then, everything changed, or many things changed after the death of George Floyd, because our team decided by themselves to show solidarity shirts. And in the first step, only the players of color decided to. And a week afterwards, after a few discussions, the whole team decided to wear shirts and to take a knee before the game against Berlin. So we have had a lot of discussions because we are running our anti-racism and program against anti-Semitism for years now, but it was always not the first aim to include the team as they showed up and they made clear statements, but we were not really interested in taking them in front. It was our interest to have supporters, players, sponsors, and BBB itself. So a mix of everybody, but the team was then in this situation the first ones who took the first step. And what was very powerful was a demonstration in Dortmund for the Black Lives Matter movement. And one player who's injured or was actually injured in this time took part in the demonstration and walked next to supporters. And I think that was very powerful as well. And to come to an end, what was our biggest aim in the beginning of the pandemic and in this unsureness time was to make sure that showing solidarity is not just a financial thing. And that was kind of an issue we tried to make sure. So for example, in ticket refunds or in showing solidarity with bars. So we have had different programs to include everybody and not only the persons who are in a financial situation to show their solidarity.
Thank you, Daniel. And absolutely, as you say, it's not just, it shouldn't just be a responsibility for the players to use their platforms as well. It should also be an educational tool for supporters and other stakeholders in football clubs to really use this impetus that we have at the moment to learn. Martino, in coming to you, would you be able to reflect on the impact that the ongoing racial justice movement has had both for AC Milan and for Italian football? For those watching that perhaps may not be too familiar with the reputation of Italian football, and please do feel free to disagree with me on this reputation. Last season, in the context of Serie A football, virulent anti-black racism from the media, football commentators and supporters was very visible, with black footballers repeatedly being subjected to racist abuse. Additionally, the presence of anti-Semitic imagery relating to Anne Frank and the Holocaust in the past few years has also been deeply worrying. Therefore, in recent weeks, what engagement, as I say, has AC Milan and the Italian FA been engaged in the broader racial justice movement, and specifically on anti-Semitism? What initiatives has AC Milan been involved in to promote discussion on these important issues?
Absolutely. This has been a really busy season regarding anti-racism activity for AC Milan. Everything started at the very beginning of the season, when we had some very nasty and unacceptable episodes at the really beginning. I'm talking about end of August and beginning of September in the Italian stadiums. This moved our property and us as management to decide to stand and to lead the anti-racism movement in Italy. The first thing organized was this derby anti-racism. Was a football match was at the beginning of September, 21st September 2019. We decided to dedicate it to anti-racism campaign, and we organized some activity on press announcement before the match and in stadium activity, both with Inter. We took a picture together with an anti-racism banner, and then some social activities after. And this just to raise awareness regarding this issue and to stand as leader in regarding these kind of issues. Then in November, we organized an anti-racism workshop in Milan, hosted by AC Milan, participating in the main clubs and institutional football. And we decided to lead by example. So we were invited by some specialists. Actually, we were from the UK, some of them. Terence Paris, maybe you know him, and Lawrence Lörcher, communicator and marketing guys from England. And this was the occasion, the opportunity to define some milestones regarding our anti-racism activity in the country. There were unique among clubs. We need to stand together and to organize activities together and put pressure on institutions to demand them to give resources to work together on these issues, and show public displays of strength. I don't know if you are familiar, but there were some newspaper first pages. There were some issues regarding journalism in Italy that we had to stand and tackle. And this ends up with obviously the Black Lives Matter movement, our players and us as a club, we participated. So I can say that we are happy to say that we are leading this movement. There is a lot to do. Obviously, we are tens of years behind England regarding these issues. But thanks also to our new property that is actually English. Our CEO is coming from UEFA Football, and we are trying to push this movement in Italy and to try to support this kind of initiatives that are absolutely necessary to come out from the middle age of football in Italy regarding these topics. And then regarding this, so is, as you said, there is the power of communication, so raise awareness and use communication channels of the football clubs to raise awareness. There is taken specific and behaviors of the fans, both on social networks, on social media, and in the stadium, and some education that we are happy to do with our players, all our juvenile players and our female players, and we bring a delegation, as you know, Alina, because that's what put us in contact. We bring them every year. We have a very complete program of visits to the Shoah Memorial in Milan. We bring our players there to raise awareness among them regarding this issue. So we try to cover all the aspects, consider the tools that we have and the weapons that we have. And I think we are on the right way and leading the movement.
Thanks, Martino, and it is great to hear that football rivalries are being put aside on this issue, and a real, I guess if you can call it, intercommunal approach has been taken on this. Now, in many European countries like that of the UK and Italy, for instance, where football has such a heightened role in the collective conscience of society, football then becomes a space where socio-political discussions are themselves had. Lord Mann, could you perhaps tell us, in light of the, as we say, the ongoing racial justice movement triggered by the shocking killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, what engagement and collaboration has there been between the UK government and Westminster and the FA, the English Footballing Association, on anti-discrimination?
Oh, there is ongoing positive dialogue, and the players in particular are taking a very positive lead. And when we've had one or two small issues, we've seen clubs take lead, and particularly pay credit to Chelsea Football Club and Bruce Buck, who runs the club on a day-to-day basis, who's had a big influence with the Premier League in fine-tuning how the Premier League and therefore English football associates itself with the whole Black Lives Matters campaign. And that support for the principles of the movement, what it's attempting to achieve, has been reinforced by leading players. And so government has been not observing, but applauding the stance that's been taken by people such as the Premier League and football in the responsible way, but the very active way in which these issues have been put forward and given a wider audience. And I think that again bodes well for the future, that we deal with the real issues in a pragmatic way with progress. And so on that, I think both the Premier League and Chelsea FC, for their role within it, do need to be congratulated and take some credit, but in particular the players. I hope this doesn't sound too much of a eulogy of support for the work of Chelsea FC, but one of their former players, Paul Elliott, who of course played in Italy very successfully, he has been the leader of the initiative within English football, and it's worth reminding everyone that he sat on the football anti-Semitism working group 10 years ago that I convened as a player representative or former player representative, and played a significant role then. And so we're seeing something of a coming together of those who've fought against anti-Semitism and those fighting other racisms and anti-black racism. And football seems to be providing quite a lead, better perhaps than other parts of society, in holding these two strands together, which I think is quite a model for everyone. So the football message, I think, is at the moment a very positive message, and a very considered and a very measured message, but one that is getting through to the wider population.
Thank you, Lord Mann. And I think this is precisely the ideal scenario where we see the players actually being at the forefront of providing positive models to supporters, rather than people responsible with corporate responsibility. So I'm sure this makes your jobs, much more pleasant and coherent with the spirit of the organization. And with regards to applauding Chelsea, I think one of the main takeaways we hope to have from this is precisely the idea of spreading these best practices, which I think all three teams here today can provide. So we cannot highlight these enough. Gianluca, let me come to you and reflect on one of the points that Martino mentioned, which is that they've been trying to also put pressures on institutions to work together and present a strong public front on this topic. I wonder if you could tell us about any governmental involvement in this context of sport, either in this current moment or more generally. Have there been any joint initiatives that you think are worth highlighting and so on?
Well, you know, the sport minister asked the Football Italian Federation to adopt stricter rules in order to tackle racism and discrimination in football. And he spoke also about the possibility to postpone matches and impose sanctions. But apart from that, the issue is, as you said, is as Mr. Roghi said, is on the educational level. I think the appointment of the national coordinator for the fight against anti-Semitism shows the will to act against prejudice in all the fields, including sports, where racist behaviors are not infrequent, unfortunately. Our office is working on the implementation of the international definition of the IRA within the Italian context, which we believe could be adopted as a kind of as a deontological code by the federation and the football teams. But more broadly, we have to fight, as I said, on the cultural level, bringing I think the majority to dissociate themselves from racist supporters.
Wonderful. Yes, I think indeed the office of the coordinator has a huge potential to move things forward without a question. So we were really glad to when the position was created. And so I think this is a good segue to focusing a little bit more specifically on the topic of anti-Semitism. And let us go now to Chelsea. You've been particularly proactive in working to tackle anti-Semitism. You have mentioned the Say No to Anti-Semitism campaign a bit earlier on. You've been doing a lot of this work together with Lord Mann. And you've also mentioned the fact that you adopted the IRA definition, which indeed is a really tremendous step. And it's wonderful to see that a lot of teams have been following your good example and doing so as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how this process played out within Chelsea, how you decided to actually adopt these measures, and of course, to what extent have they been successful? Are you able to look out there and really see a tangible effect that they've had?
I think from the get-go, this has been driven by the owner, Mr. Abramovich, who tasked everyone within the football club, from the board all the way down throughout the organisation, to come up with a plan to tackle anti-Semitism. Well, actually, he noticed there was a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, in the UK, and in the US, and actually wanted to use the name of Chelsea to be able to do something about it, not just at Chelsea Football Club, but in the wider community as well, and internationally. So what we tried to do is develop a program that we could actually transport into other sports or other community organizations, focusing, as I mentioned before, on raising education. So actually telling fans what anti-Semitism looks like in a football context, what it looks like in a community context, developing awareness. So, you know, telling fans the history of Jewish footballers through a mural that we've had at Stamford Bridge, through actively engaging with a huge amount of Jewish organizations, as well as actually supporting our own work and supporting other community organizations to go out and carry on that fight. So, you know, it's something that we're incredibly proud to do, but something that I think football has got a unique role in its ability to engage with people and to tell, to spread a positive message. Myself or any of the other guys from a football club will tell you that when your captain or when your star player is actually actively engaging with a program, it sends a very powerful message throughout the entire football club and throughout the football world that this is something that football will not tolerate, and something that we do not have do not want at our club. There's still a long way to go. We would be daft to say, okay, that's it, the job's done, the job's over. This is an ongoing fight. Until that day comes, we are committed to be able to make a difference in whatever way that Chelsea Football Club and the wider football community can.
Thank you very much, Simon. And as you say, I'm very pleased to hear the commitment that Chelsea has taken on this. As you say, it's an ongoing fight, there's no end goal as such, almost, which makes it difficult, and very pleasing to hear the ongoing action. Now, Daniel, if I can come to you here, Borussia Dortmund has been particularly active on anti-racist issues. Chelsea has this reputation perhaps in an English context, and Borussia Dortmund certainly has this reputation in a German context. Starting back in 2011, Borussia Dortmund has been involved in running education workshops, allowing club representatives and supporters to visit Nazi concentration and extermination camps in Europe as a real learning initiative. In 2019, Borussia Dortmund was recognised for its work in fighting against the far right, against racism and discrimination, and was one of 2 winners of the UEFA Equal Game Award. Would you be able to reflect, therefore, on Dortmund's initiatives in fighting against anti-Semitism and hate, and to share your thoughts on the successes of these programs?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's really a program which we are running since years now. We started in 2011, as you mentioned before, and I think what is very important is that we are addressing or try to address the positive force. So the extreme right or right-wing people in our fan movement, they have their structures, they have their community, and they always threatened people with a positive mindset. And what we try to do, and what we still are doing, is build a positive network or a network of positive supporters who are then engaged and empowered by the club and in taking part in this program. And I think the biggest success that we have is that we now have a huge anti-racism, anti-discriminationary fan initiative. So it's not only actions which are taken or which are in our work as a club, it's always also a thing which comes up from the supporters. And I think this is the most powerful way to handle and to react in bad behavior or in discriminationary behavior. And in the last 3 and 4 years, more or less 4 years, we did another step with including our sponsors and partners. So it's getting wider, and it becomes really a value of the club. And so I think on long-term perspective and with the exchange with network partners, it was really a huge success to bring it up to this point, to have a common sense and a value in the club against discrimination. And it's always in our mind. So when we talk about new jerseys, for example, we have a checkup. Is there any sign inside which could be misinterpreted? Or if we bring scarves or whatever we are doing, it's part of the club's value. And I think this is very powerful in both sides. So from supporters, but also the club, and then the sponsors and partners as well. And what is maybe another success is that the registrations for our events and programs and everything that we are offering to the wider public is very, so we have a lot of registrations there. So, for example, in January, a Holocaust survivor told her story in the stadium, and more than 500 people came to the stadium, and it was really like, okay, we have kind of a problem with the room because it was, more or less too small. But the interest is very high, and we have built, kind of a climate where everybody can take part and can learn something.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Daniel. And it's really interesting to see where the entry point is with regards to different teams. I mean, you all highlighted the fact that the players have really been at the forefront. But it was interesting to hear Simon speaking about really a commitment at the top, which generated a lot of momentum. And in your case, a lot of momentum from the supporters themselves that are being then supported in turn by the team. So it's interesting to see these two approaches.
Maybe just one last thing, because when you mentioned Simon, and we know each other and have had an exchange also with Lord Mann, and I think it's very important to say that in these topics there's no sporting compatibility between the clubs, so there's a huge exchange, and I think this makes the whole thing also very powerful, and we can learn from each other also beyond borders. And my last sentence.
Certainly, absolutely. And I hope that this discussion is also a small contributing factor to that exchange. And Martino, I'd like to let you add anything from the perspective of AC Milan. You already touched on some of the work you're doing on anti-Semitism, engagement with the Shoah Memorial and so on, but if there's something you'd like to add, please, now is the time.
Actually, yes, there is. We have an anti-discrimination policy in general. That means that goes to improve the accessibility to the stadium for people with disability and to support access to sport with people with disability. We work with the Black Lives Matter movement. So we work with against anti-Semitism, both for raising awareness, bringing the first team to the Shoah Memorial in Milan, and having this visit program for our youth sector. So I think that, as Simon said, is very important that the commitment of the ownership and of the top management of the club. And it's clear that this ownership, our new ownership, is just a couple of years in, and this management are pushing very, very strongly and firmly on this in a behavior, in an environment that is the Italian football environment that is probably less developed than the one in Northern Europe or in Great Britain. But the effort is great, as we said. We are leading it, and we are trying to pull everybody in coming from the institutions, other clubs, both sport and administration institutions. And but if they don't follow us, we will move along. So there is no discussion that there is no place for racism and for discrimination in our policies. And we are moving on, and we are happy to lead this movement in Italy.
Thank you, Martino. Great to hear of the motivation that you have on this topic, and we look forward to seeing more and more results coming from the Italian game and from AC Milan in particular. Now, in moving this discussion towards more of a legislative focus, coming from a Scottish context myself, one of the topics that consistently dominates discussion on racism and particularly sectarianism in Scottish football is that of strict liability. Strict liability, as I'm sure most of you are aware, essentially frames each supporter attending a match as a direct representative of the football club that they're supporting, and therefore seeks to hold not just the individual but also the football clubs accountable for the actions of its fans. Now, while this has never been adopted in Scotland, it has, and to my mind continues to be a major discussion point on this topic, with discussions having taken place and draft bills having been tabled on strict liability at the Scottish Parliament, for instance. Lord Mann, if I can come to you on this, is strict liability something that has been spoken about at Westminster or in your discussion with English footballing bodies? And if not, are you confident in the current and existing legislation in place surrounding the countering of racism among football supporters?
We've discussed the concept of strict liability quite a lot, but the problem I have with it is somewhat different to some of the problems that the football authorities have had, which is that the concept is based on people in reality who go inside a stadium. But the power of football is well beyond the stadium. And so the reach, for example, of these three huge clubs is international, but the influence in each country is huge. So if Dortmund does something that's positive within the football club, that has a positive implication for the whole city of Dortmund, without any question. So I'm much more interested in partnerships to see what works, and of football taking a responsibility for educating and inspiring and leading that supporter base of millions, which each of these three clubs has. I think that's the real power. And one thing that B'nai B'rith could, if I could very cheekily suggest that we need, is some independent, perhaps academic analysis of what is working. So I know that what is happening in Dortmund is working. I can see sufficient, but I don't know exactly why it's working and how to quantify that. And that would be incredibly powerful. I know that from the publicity I've seen, that the leadership in Milan will be having a big impact. But again, that needs quantifying. So I can go and make a speech and congratulate Milan, both the office, the governmental office on anti-Semitism based there, and the football clubs, and the lead that AC Milan in particular made. But quantifying, I know the Chelsea initiative proves to me that the requirement for the person at the top, so Roman Abramovich, to really drive forward such an initiative is vital. But again, how do we quantify the success? And so I think an independent organization, and B'nai B'rith is a big, long-standing one, could assist, and governments can assist in terms of assisting, not least with funding. But I think that independent assessment of what works with those who are prepared to be honest about successes and failures is so, so vital, because these three clubs have a huge amount to teach people. But we need to learn from their mistakes on what didn't work, and from the successes and how that can be transferred.
Thank you very much. And it's always great to leave a webinar with a bit of homework. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. And, you know, I was asking the teams earlier how, you know, how are you able to see tangible change? But I suppose that indeed, in order to answer in the affirmative, you need a clear framework of measurement. And indeed, I think there's a space for independent NGOs to step in and propose potential frameworks and actually do the work behind that. I think with regards to the point about strict liability, at the end of the day, the question is, you know, how do we manage to enforce that racist supporters are not there. And of course, being punitive is never the ideal solution, but it may be a solution to keep supporters in check. So I think your message of let's focus and promote and highlight the positive actions that the teams are taking indeed has an enormous impact. But I wonder if I can revert back to you once more, whether there isn't something to be said about putting more pressures on teams to have this enforcement about how people behave on the field in the audience.
I can only speak for the UK, but I've also looked at the German law as well. I don't think, and the Dutch law and some other countries, not yet the Italian law, sorry. But I don't think there's problems in the legislation. There's problems in the application of the legislation. So I am very confident if there is a football match in England or Scotland that people can be held to account for racist behavior. The bigger problem is how to identify it. That's why the IRA definition is so important. If you can't define a racism, how can you deal with it? And so, we have worked with football to provide every kind of symbol. I think our work is now shared across Europe. Every kind of racist symbol, white power symbols, every kind of neo-Nazi symbols to identify in banners or propaganda. That's quite easy to do. But if 30,000 people are hissing at a football match, how many know what that means for a Jewish person? Who's responsible for that? And how should that be dealt with? I think using the law effectively is very important, but the real problem people are usually not in the stadium. That's my experience with racism in recent times in football. The real problem people are on their computer at home or in a bar somewhere drinking and not in the stadium. Dealing with it in the stadium is much easier.
Thank you for those remarks. And I would ask Gianluca to mirror this for an Italian context. Any reflections on legislations to regulate the space of sport, but also your opinions about the extent to which this is effective, whether implementation is working?
Yeah, again, as I said before, and as it has been emerged, I mean, a lot of work in this respect should be made at the educational level. And I can bring you an example. Mr. Roghi told something about that. In 2018, the Shoah Memorial in Milan invited the world of football to join a guided tour after racist episodes occurred. And all the Serie A teams accepted the invitation. And after that, Inter proposed the Shoah Memorial to organize something for the juvenile sector, for the youth sector, and involved in the organization some schools as well as the Olympia basket. So it's like a chain. The event took place also in 2019, and it was linked also to an exposition regarding the figure of Arpad Weiz, which was a player and Inter's coach as well, and was deported during the Second World War. Events should have been repeated also in 2020, but didn't happen because of the virus. So now this is only an example of how awareness can be raised and spread over the entire world of football and among society. But it's plenty of this kind, I think, of these good initiatives, starting from the very bottom of the world of football, as is shown, for example, by the experience of the Anti-Racist World Cup, which take place every year in Bologna.
Thank you very much for that. And I see some similarities in terms of context. As our hour is slowly coming to a close, one issue that we really wanted to touch on that is certainly connected to, but goes a little bit beyond the scope of the discussion is the question of gender balance. We decided to address this looking actually at the composition of the panel, recognizing and acknowledging that it's rather gender imbalanced, and considering that it would be worth to at least have a reflection on this. Representation is so important in trying to cultivate an inclusive and diverse environment. And while we looked at this rather from the racism and anti-Semitism perspective, the question of gender, I think, also plays its own role. And so I just wanted to open the discussion to whoever one of you would like to have a short reflection on how your teams or your offices are thinking about this question of gender. I won't name any names.
Can I say something?
Please.
There is a book of Michael Correa, which is called Popular History of Football, and it says that this sport has always been also an instrument of emancipation. So, for example, women in particular used to play football since the 19th century, and they intended also as a way to free themselves from strict control. But the men's violence pushed their aspirations back. So I think that nowadays, as well as more than 100 years ago, I believe that women's football success we are seeing nowadays owes a lot to feminist movement. Something to reflect on, also on the emancipation which links the gender issues to our topic of today.
I think definitely women's football has become a more prominent,
we are
especially
proud.
as we've seen a lot of the football players there take a more activist role. So I think the discussion has been really driven by women players. Martino, you wanted to
Yes,
comment?
we are proud of our female teams, and actually they become one of the best ambassadors of our club. Fans in Italy are getting used to playing football, and they're getting attached to the team. We see more and more people, more and more fans going watching our female team matches. And we, as we do, we go in delegation to visit hospital, for example, or public institutions. We always have a double delegation of representatives, both from first AC Milan team male and first AC Milan team female. And the girls are getting more and more enthusiasm by the fans, and we are very, very proud of it. And it's something we are very, very, very happy. And also we have a big representative of women in our top management, and this is also something that makes us very proud. So I think again, the differentiation and is a value, and we are very proud of it.
Wonderful. Surely having women in positions of leadership within the organization has a trickle-down effect in terms of the organizational culture there. Simon, I see you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was just going to say from a Chelsea perspective, obviously we have a senior director who's female, but all the way down through the club there are very senior women and very important women. But even we're one of the only female clubs to actually have a female manager. It's something that we're incredibly proud to have Emma Hayes as our women's team manager. I mean, the culture of the club is a completely different place to probably what it was 10, 15 years ago when I joined. We we take our responsibility in a very serious way. And you know, even in schools now, we're delivering female empowerment workshops. And just to bring it all back quite nicely, I hope, is we actually took our women's team out to Israel last summer to help sort of promote and foster peace in the community. So we had Israeli kids, Palestinian kids playing together, undertaking female empowerment workshops. And it's something, again, that the owner's been very supportive of, but something that we're incredibly proud of at Chelsea.
Maybe I can add another perspective as well. We have still a lot of homework to do, to be honest. We are just discussing about the establishment of a women's team, and so we are more focused on our female supporters base in Dortmund, and what we are actually establishing is a safe room in the stadium, so supporters who be addressed by sexualized violence or rapist or something, they can use a code word and go directly or were brought directly to this room where specialists then help them in this situation. So this is one new thing that we are doing, and especially during the pandemic situation, we have supported the Women's Advice Center here in Dortmund, because there were a lot of bad stories we have heard, and we thought it would be good to support them and to help them in their structure as well. So just to add 2-3 more things to the others.
Thank you all for your reflections, and yeah, absolutely. When you consider the strides that women's football has made in recent years with the growing profile of the Women's World Cup, for instance, we very much hope that this progress is continued and going forward. Now, as Alina mentioned, we are slowly running out of time, so perhaps if we can finish on a more positive note. Sport has regularly been referenced as a potential societal unifier and a real driver for boosting social cohesion, whether that be the role of rugby in South Africa or Fiji, or even at an individual level, such as the well-documented friendship of Arab Israeli and Jewish Israeli footballers, Baram Kayal and Tomer Hemed, for instance. In your view, perhaps Lord Mann, if I can go to you, how can we make sure that sport is used as a societal unifier rather than a source of division between communities?
Well, what my strategy is very simple, is to encourage the spreading of good practice and across countries, not just within countries. In other words, bringing people together. And there is a deal between government and sport, and especially football is the biggest sport in the world, by far the biggest in Europe. And the deal is football needs a lot from government. Not in the small things, but in the big things, in order for everything to work well. So we should expect from government that football plays a modest role in civil society. And that modest role in tackling racism seems to me very straightforward. It will boost the brand name of football and of the club, so it's good for advertisers. It boosts the reputation, it brings more investors, it brings more supporters. And therefore the business case is absolute. And if we encourage best practice, the clubs who are in the lead will get the rewards. And as government should be welcoming that. So here we have 3 clubs in the lead. I predict these 3 clubs will be relatively more successful in football over the next 10 years. And again, not quite a role for B'nai B'rith to assess that, but I think that linkage is something that politicians can keep stressing, because football is a business. Any good business has a responsibility that it takes on itself, and that reinforces the strength of the business. So doing the good thing is also sensible. And I think that message is not understood further down the football pyramid in the way it needs to be. Perhaps government can do more, therefore, by promoting this best practice to encourage others to follow.
Certainly, and it's perhaps something I hadn't previously considered, how the issue of anti-racism fits into the actual on-the-pitch footballing aspect. So I very much appreciate your comments, Lord Mann. And Gianluca, going over to you, very much the same question. How do we promote this? How do we make sure sport is used as a unifier, as opposed to, you know, having headlines of division, as is all too often the case?
You know, unfortunately, sport education is quite underestimated in Italy. But I think, yeah, it's fundamental to socialize personal as well as social values. I mean, we can see through sport, we can see how enemies can become opponents, and opponents can become actually teammates. So through sport, we learn how to cooperate with other people and respect them. So definitely sport can give a big help in imagining a non-discriminatory society. And we have to, I think, bear in mind this.
Thank you, Gianluca. That's a great note to end on. Unfortunately, this is more or less all the time we have for our conversation today, but I think that we are all leaving with quite a few points and best practices that have been shared. And if I can just take a moment to underline a few things that were mentioned. First of all, the adoption of the IRA definition, the importance of this cannot be overstated. So I hope that more and more of your teams in your various countries will follow suit on this. The importance of engaging all levels of stakeholders, from supporters to players and leadership, cross-country collaborations. Then some more specific things such as mapping and banning certain hateful symbols, study visits, making the business case. So basically rewarding good behavior, developing frameworks for monitoring progress, creating safe rooms. I thought that was very interesting. Empowering women supporter groups, empowering supporters who have positive impact in general. So I think these are all really valuable takeaways. A huge thank you to our guests for all your insights. The issue of anti-Semitism and hate in football is unfortunately quite real, quite widespread, and it is our hope that the ongoing climate of pursuing racial justice will also translate into the space of football. Once again, our thanks to Lord Mann, to Gianluca, Simon, Martino, and Daniel. We really appreciate your participation today, and to everyone watching, thank you very much for tuning in, and we're looking forward to see you on our next programs.